Hey, TV critics, I just wanted to give you some advice about the final essay. That's called the Comprehensive Critical Analysis, and it's due last day of class. That will vary depending on what section you're in. But I first wanted to draw your attention to, the important details that I've pulled together for you at the top of our course. So depending on the section, the due dates will be a couple of days different, but please do check out what I've set up there. It includes information about potential extra credit, as well as the due dates for the final comprehensive exam and when the final exam is going to happen. So as I said, I'd like to just give you a little bit of advice about the final essay. So let's go in there again and just share that with you. And I've moved the prompt up for the final essay. It's right here. So here's the essay with the self-evaluation. And then there's also a sample written by a student in the fall last semester. Jordan Globerson did a great job, so we can check that out. So once again, I'm not sure when I change screens whether I'm actually sharing the right thing. So let's just make sure we're going to be sharing a different tab this time. And here we go. That probably is going to work. I mean, there it is. So comprehensive essay, the whole idea of this essay is to give you a chance to pull together all your thinking about the show that you've been writing about this semester. So that would include the narrative analysis, the cultural analysis using either rhetorical or cultural theory or representation, which you just turned in. I'll soon be giving you feedback about that. And of course, your group leader post and anything that might have come up in the group discussions that you thought was worth including in the essay. So this is really a matter of pulling together the old work and of summarizing the important points, evaluating what you've written to see like what worked, what didn't. By what worked and what didn't, I think there are a couple of indicators on that. First of all, please reread the comments that I would have given about your narrative analysis, for instance. That could give you some guidance. And I hope you participated in the writing workshop peer evaluation, which is actually open this week as I post this video, which gave you a chance to share your cultural analysis and get feedback from a couple of other students in the class. And also I will be giving you some quick feedback on that. Largely it's a matter of figuring out what is worth retaining from what you did before. Because this comprehensive essay is a maximum of 2,000 words, which is 8 double-spaced pages. I have no doubt you've written more than that. So you're going to have to edit this down. Please do not go beyond the assigned length, because one of the learning objectives of this assignment, finally, is that you evaluate your own work. You figure out how to make your description of that project, of that program more efficient, more compact. And part of what I'm looking at is how you have actually, are you able to distinguish what's useful and interesting critically in your earlier work? Can you pull it together into this final comprehensive essay? There's a second part to this assignment, which is much shorter, and it is to write a separate 250-word self-assessment of what you did. This is not in order to give yourself as, hey, I did a decent job, I deserve an A. The idea is that you are going to assess your progress and tell me how you determined what you wanted to keep from your earlier work, how that progressed into what I'm reading in your final essay. So there is a sample, an example of this online as well. And it's pretty good. Both the essay is good and also the self-assessment or self-evaluation there is also decent. Now below decent, by decent I mean it's exactly what I'm looking for. As I look down on this assignment, it's written up in painstaking detail, of course. Please do read it over. I suggest that you take a look at chapter 9 of the textbook before you write this. I'm always trying to, motivate students to read the textbook more closely. I hope you've been reading the chapters along with us. And this final chapter is really important to get a good grade, I think, out of the course as a whole. It is chapter 9 on writing television criticism. I've referred to it throughout the semester. I hope you have been aware of that. It's called Guidelines for Television Criticism, and it contains short blurbs to describe what should go in the different sections of your essay. You will notice that there is something about story and genre, which you wrote about during your narrative analysis. There are sections about organization, opening segments, and also the structure of the program, which may refer, if we're talking about the narrative, then it could refer to some of the Todorov and hermeneutic theory we looked at before. The look of its program and its codes. We talked about the way the television show is filmed. And you may include a section about that. And then we get into more of the cultural concerns. How does the show relate to the conditions of our time, which would be here under context? And also analysis, where the bulk of reflection about the cultural issues that came up in chapters on rhetoric, on chapters on cultural studies, cultural analysis, and also the chapter on representation, they would all sort of come under this. So it is really a good idea to read this chapter to get a sense of, when I say a comprehensive critical essay, what I mean is your critical essay should address many of the things that I just mentioned there, and each little section here in this chapter helps give you additional guidance on how to write about that, basically. The final section here, well, there's judgment, and then the final section here, writing television criticism, basically gives you the kind of instruction you would find in the prompt for the assignment. So it's like, what are the expected sections of your essay? What should be in the introduction? What should be in the body? What kind of production information you should have? And then finally, how you would conclude it, giving your overall evaluation and contribution of understanding to the program. So those should all be parts of your final essay. And if you're wondering about evaluation, the section here on judgment describes and gives you, again, a few questions which could help spur you on to, a good critical evaluation. So, to emphasize that, a good critical evaluation basically means, how has a concept or a number of concepts from our course giving you the tools to appreciate or criticize the show that you're working on more deeply than you could have when you came into the class. So the evaluation or the judgment that you will offer on the program is, is paired with the critical concepts that you use in order to critique it. So if you're working on a show that parodies a lot of other shows, you might draw on the concept of intertextuality and say, finally, one of the strongest things I learned about this show is how its use of intertextuality contributes to, its cultural messages, its satirical bite, its potential production of pleasure for some specific audiences, and so on. And you are free to use a number of different concepts from the class. In fact, again, the reason I call this a comprehensive essay is because I kind of expect you to put the program at the center of your essay and then look at it through different lenses, through the narrative lens, through a rhetorical or a cultural lens, and through maybe a visual style lens. So they're comprehensive in the sense that you look at the show from many different angles using the concepts from our course. When you do that, you're going to do an excellent job on this essay. And I wish you luck. Otherwise, I think most of the details are discussed in the prompt. And of course, if there's any questions you have, please look this over early on so you can get back to me with questions, and I'll have plenty of time to pick those up and answer them. And again, what might help as well for some students, they really appreciate seeing an example. So again, I'll share my screen with you. At the bottom of the big blurb on our homepage, you'll find that. And there's also here a link to the example essay. Here, it's from Jordan Globerson from fall 2019. Here's the self-assessment that he wrote, remember, which is separate. It's a 50 points for this self-assessment where he describes, again, he doesn't just say, hey, thumbs up, I did a good job. That's not the point. The point is to say how he came about pulling together his previous work and putting it into this final draft. And then here is an example of his, well, this is Jordan's essay, which was excellent. It was an A. I think you'll see the quality of it chiefly resides in what I'm asking you to do as well, which is to use concepts like power and rhetoric on the show. And he chose Cobra Kai, which is, you know, probably not the first show that every television critic would celebrate. He does a great job on it. And it's even more impressive because it wasn't the most groundbreaking piece of TV, but it's a great essay. So check it out. I hope that will give you some guidelines for your essay, in addition to looking at chapter 9 of the textbook and the prompt. So I wish you a good time reflecting and finishing up on our work in this course.